if you wait till next spring to spray and you think, oh, I'm just going to spray it really heavy, it'll be fine, you're going to fight brome the rest of that prairie or native's life. Like you really will. So you want to get that second spraying on. So if you wait till next spring, your next spraying has to be the next fall, meaning that you're planting way later, getting a full season less of growing. The thought process is we need to spray right now during the cool season rebump, right? They're coming up in end of March into April and in May. And but then they kind of go dormant. Yeah, they're a little green, but they kind of become dormant. They're not going to take glyphosate as well during the summer. Well, now that it's getting cool, they're kind of popping back up. We're getting these fall rains and they're like, hey, we're here, we're alive. Now is a good time. Hit them. We just hit them with glyphosate. I know that there's some people out there that are anti-spray. We caused a huge mess by bringing so much brome over, and unless you're going to take a huge plow and dig that stuff up, your other option is spraying it.
Nickolas, Kent, good to see you guys. How's it going?
Always good to see you, Jake. I got my Big Lebowski Buck shirt on right now. This is one of those shirts that's you got to speak up when you're talking to me because my shirt's so loud I can't hear you. And my
You're
wife,
such a dad. You're a 70-year-old dad, dude.
My wife will not let me wear this shirt in public, and I wore it. I'm always tempted to like bust it out. It's like it's not that bad, and then I start wearing. And my friend Alex Gruen, who I think you've met before, Jake, he runs East West Hunts, and he saw a video of me from our podcast when we interviewed Mark Turner. And he just roasted me so hard. I can't remember what he said about it, but it's so funny. We came to terms with it. It's a Big Lebowski style of shirt. So
you got your best dress here on the Land Podcast.
That's right.
Thank you. You got the podcast.
That's right.
Shirt.
I was, you ask how we're doing. I was doing better about 3 minutes ago before I saw Ken in that shirt. So,
well, that's great. Well, it's always a pleasure to chat with you guys, especially even on the podcast format, because I feel there's a lot of when people start ordering seed in the spring, there's a pretty important window that we're in right now for preparing for spring planting. So I want to just rip off the Band-Aid and get right into it. What do people need to be doing right now if they're planning to be putting in a buffer strip of warm season grasses, or they want to put in some pollinators in their backyard, or they have a chunk of their food plot that, maybe doesn't do that well and they want to put it into some sort of, annual or perennial food source and forbs. So I know those are three different variations.
Yeah.
Probably require three different answers, but let's just dive right into it.
Well, I'll jump in. I'm hoping this podcast, I get about 20 of these phone calls a day. Hey, what do I need to do to, and so I'm hoping this cuts it down to 10.
Yeah.
So many people listen to your podcast, but the big thing you want to think about, there's a few big things. First, what do you want? But let's assume they already know what they want there, whether it's a perennial food plot or they want a buffer strip or they're wanting a full blown diverse habitat. The next thing you need to think about is, what vegetation is growing there currently. And that's what we're going to address right now.
Mhm.
There are some things that they're not that big of a deal. Maybe you just have a weedy patch, or maybe you have corn growing there right now. That's pretty common. But let's say really common, you've got yard grass or God forbid brome, or some sort of fescue. That is what we need to look at right now and need to start taking some action on. Basically, our window for spraying those is shrinking. And I say we need to spray them because those grasses that I just mentioned, they're cool season grasses. They need 2 sprayings at least. Some people say 3, but we found quite a bit of success with 2. They need 2 sprayings in 2 different seasons. So you'll have one this fall. It's going to look dead as a doornail. Then you need to spray it again next spring. Then you can plant next spring. But if you wait till next spring to spray and you think, oh, I'm just going to spray it really heavy, it'll be fine, you're going to fight brome the rest of that prairie or native's life. Like you really will. So you want to get that second spraying on. So if you wait till next spring, your next spraying has to be the next fall, meaning that you're planting way later, getting a full season less of growing. So the thought process is we need to spray right now during the cool season rebump, right? They're coming up in end of March into April and in May. And but then they kind of go dormant. Yeah, they're a little green, but they kind of become dormant. They're not going to take glyphosate as well during the summer. Well, now that it's getting cool, they're kind of popping back up. We're getting these fall rains, and they're like, "Hey, we're here, we're alive." Now is a good time. Hit them. We just hit them with glyphosate. I know that there's some people out there that are anti-spray. We caused a huge mess by bringing so much brome over, and unless you're gonna take a huge plow and dig that stuff up, your other option is spraying it. So getting that first spray on this fall, super important if you're going to be wanting to plant anything native next spring, especially if they're grasses.
I would time that spray as Nicholas said. We're getting those late summer, early fall rains right now, and we should, we need those soil temps to drop a little bit yet to really be ideal for those cool season grasses that Nicholas mentioned, especially brome that we want to get rid of to start greening up. And I would just make sure that none of it, as it starts to green up, again, none of it is allowed to go to seed before you spray. If you have those species producing viable seeds again, then you're just letting them, even though you're killing the tissue that's above the ground right now, the existing plant, there's more seed stock in the soil that you're going to have to battle again later. So just kind of time it, give it a little bit of time right now as, we move into even early, maybe a week or two before that first hard frost in October. And that frost might come early enough that we don't really have to worry about another reseeding this fall. It just kind of depends on the weather, but I'd say we're maybe a week or two, maybe even 3 weeks away from that sweet spot, at least at this latitude where we are at, which is around the latitude of Des Moines. And so just kind of gauge off of that. If you're down south, it's going to be later, and if you're up north, then you're probably in that window right now. So yeah, as Nicholas said, get those two killings, and it would be helpful too if you could get a. So Nicholas is essentially talking about two cool season killings, which is most important because most of our problematic weeds for establishing a prairie happen in they're growing that time of year, because it's the non-native grasses that are most dominant. You can get things like Canada thistle. You can get things like um, oh, what's another broadleaf? Even dandelions or some of those other non-native broadleaf weeds that we don't like, but they, as nasty as they are, especially uh, Canada thistle, which isn't going to respond to glyphosate or 2,4-D, by the way.
I really don't like. I really don't like.
Yeah, yeah, you're gonna have to go in spots, treat that with maybe some milestone or some Duracore or something like that. Um, you're gonna you're gonna get your most bang for your buck attacking those cool seasons, but it's not a bad idea either if you have the patience and the time, and you do have some hard warm season weed pressures or warm season grass pressures, things like I think it's called common cockspur is one. Johnson grass, I believe, is a warm season grass. Those are some other non-native grasses that you do not want dominating your stand, and so it's not a bad idea to get a warm season spraying in there as well.
And you can actually do that by you can plant warm season grasses really late into the summer.
Hmm.
It's not about temperature, it's about moisture levels. So if you've got really good rain and it seems like you're going to continue to have good rain, I mean, you can plant July 5th. So what you can do is if you have that second cool season spraying in let's say late April, that'd be a good time to have that one. You could do another one July or June 20th. That'd be you'd have those warm season. They're not going to be huge and putting on seed, but they're going to be growing. You could
Mhm.
do a spraying then and then plant. If you're just doing glyphosate, you can plant the next day. Actually, fun fact, my dad would often plant the day before he would spray Roundup. And so you can get that third spraying in there, or it's a little late right now. So I know that this advice is not as prevalent, but next year, if you decide, hey, I'm going to do my first spraying in April, you can do a second spraying in late July, and then you can do your third spraying in early October, late September, early October, just depending on the weather. So that could get you your three sprayings. Now, we should note that most people we connect with do 2 sprayings, and it goes really well. But some people, they just want to put that nail in the coffin for the weeds. They want to go above
Mhm.
and beyond. We totally understand, like, some of those problem species. And just obviously everyone knows their land better. If you've got a huge issue with Canada thistle, maybe it's worth waiting an extra year to make sure you get that extra spray on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
One of my biggest regrets on establishing my own CRP in prairie, uh, I should have took a whole extra year to do that, because right now
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I want to get it in now. You know, it's I want it
Right.
now.
Yep. Yep.
No patience, and then now I have a backpack sprayer. You know, like
Oh,
Yep.
yeah.
it just it created so much more work without having the patience, and it's one of those things. I'm sure, one of the biggest mistakes you guys run into is for folks that call you and say, hey, it's not turning out quite like I like. And as you go through and try to have a prognosis on why it didn't turn out the way it was supposed to, it's probably because they missed a key step, or they didn't recognize some of the problem. I mean, to me, I didn't know it was going to be that hard to kill thistle. I just thought,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, everything else you spray chemical on it and it dies. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's
There's
not like
things out there that can survive nuclear war. It's crazy. And I think that's part of it too, is understanding that some it's very hard to ever get it perfect, because there are just so many invasive species that exist in our ecosystems now. And here in the Midwest, we have the most fertile soils in the world. So everything that can handle our climate wants to grow here if given the chance. And so it might take, these are good general instructions for getting, setting the table to plant your prairie, but it's not a bad idea to have that backpack sprayer and to try some different chemicals. I also will throw this little thing out there, this little nugget for some of your more advanced land managing listeners. We have sold mixes before that are plateau what would be compatible would be the right word there. Plateau is a herbicide that was created back in the, I don't remember what the active ingredient is called in it, but it was a herbicide created back in the 90s for prairie reconstruction. And there's people that will select species that can handle plateau as a pre-emergent, and
Yeah.
they will plant their seed, do a dormant seeding, and then will apply plateau, and closer to the time of year when that you're in that pre-emergent window for warding off those other species you don't want. And so it is risky anytime you're using a pre-emergent on a new planting. So but if you're out there and you have a lot of experience with land management and herbicide application, give us a call and we can chat about that, and so you understand the risks, and we can talk with you about the mix that we selected, species that are
Yeah.
specifically compliant with that herbicide, and it's just another option out there.
And
And
we've seen it turn out really well.
yeah,
I should be clear. It has gone very well. It's one of those that I refuse to put on the website because nobody is ordering something that needs that much, careful care,
yeah,
with a credit card without one of us talking to them about
yeah.
it. So,
As Carol, our founder, would say, you got to be an operator, not a driver, to be able to use that mix. so,
yeah.
so it's for the more experienced folks out there, and it does limit a little bit on diversity, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But you can add that in
But
through
the
interseeding
diversity that
after.
they love is heavily overlapping with what whitetail like. You got
Yes.
the really
Yep.
tall grasses, you got a lot of legumes in there. They're big fans. So,
Yep.
we went from 10 calls back to 20 after,
yeah.
after that's
Oh, man.
done. No, I was kidding.
Hey, anybody who wants to call, you give us a call. I'm happy to
Yeah.
chat.
Yeah. So, okay. So for the guy that, let's say he just bought a new farm in the last year, or maybe he's closing on it here by the end of the year, and there was already somewhat of an existing CRP prairie, like maybe it's a 10-year CRP stand that wasn't properly managed,
Mm.
and they're going to renew it.
Yeah.
What is the process to reintroduce or interseed new or fresh species, as everything kind of, like,
Mhm.
what are some
Yeah.
species that typically tend to take over and choke out some of the other ones? And so how do we reintroduce or overseed, interseed those
Yeah.
new species? What's that
I,
process look like?
well, one, if they can, if the CRP is kind of like falling on its face and it's like, hey, we just need to redo this. I'd bean it. I'd be in it for 2 years. You're going to get a way better CRP stand or rotation of corn or beans, and just for 2 years. That's going to go a lot better. You know, I know there will be some work there. You're going to have to probably put a plow to it. You probably got trees in there and all sorts of stuff. But that, if you're just going for best stand, that's what I would go for.
Can I add one caveat in there
Yeah.
real quick?
Yeah.
If it is ground that's already in a CRP contract, and this is a guy who maybe just recently purchased the property, he needs to talk with the NRCS first to make sure he's going to be able to re-enroll it after sod busting it for a couple years, and turning it back into production. Just because there's weird little loopholes with, what years were those acres cropped,
Yeah,
and what's
that's
going on
true.
with the current farm bill, and what years do you have to fall in there, because you might find out on the other side of that I can't re-enroll until we get a new farm bill passed, or we get
Make sure you're rolling around in that red tape. Just get all comfy
get
in
it
that
all
red
over
tape.
yourself. Yeah.
Now that being said, let's say you don't want to go corn and beans, that would kind of give you a fresh start. If you don't want to do that, and you want to introduce new species, very difficult. You probably, at the very least, you need a regimen of burning. I would definitely say you want 2 sprayings on as well. Interseeding, we've talked to a lot of experts, and almost all of them are like, yeah, basically wasting your money. I
Mm.
mean, and the government the government has a project call where you have to interseed if there's not enough forbs.
Yep.
And I refuse to sell high quality forbs. I sell the dirtiest, cheapest stuff because not because I'm trying to just give out crap. It's because I know that's not going to show up. I'm not going to
Yeah.
give you Blazing Star that we worked very hard to grow just for it to not show up in your interseeding. So
Mhm.
that's basically what it boils down to. Now, that being said, I've seen exceptions. The exceptions being there was one guy, he just interseeded with easy to grow species. um, he just seeded it out there like 3 years in a row. He was like, "I'm just gonna do it till I see it." Okay, well, and then there's one guy who swears by fire and grazing,
Mm.
to interseed. Chad Gravy. We interviewed, his name was Chad Gravy. He said, if you put fire to it and then on the new growth can get it grazed, and you're talking about a late spring, early summer fire, so early May, and then shortly when it's greening up, get it grazed, then you have a pretty decent chance of getting that interseeding to take. Um, and then another thing you can do is you could do like a half spray. You could do enough spray where it's going to set things back. Or let's say you're just trying to set back the current prairie. You do like um a half dose of Roundup and then kind of plant into that. One guy told me he did that, but I never heard how that ended up coming out. And then another option is if you're just trying to kill out brome and you're trying to get more native warm season grasses, that is doable, and it has to do with very well timed sprayings. So to be in the fall, it'd be after they're killing frost, because then your big blue Indian switchgrass, they go dormant overnight, and then you still have your brome should still be lively, but you need to spray. I think Kent mentioned this earlier. When it's a little warmer, the lowest temperature of the day can't be below 55, and then that
For
brome will.
glyphosate.
Right.
Yeah, what did I say?
You can get
No,
away. You
I'm
can
just
get
asking,
away with it, maybe down to
what
45, but yeah.
what's the significance of the temperature? Is it
The plant won't take it up.
Right.
Okay.
Yep,
Okay.
yep. So it needs to have kind of a low of 55. And yeah, dad did spray a little lower, and we've sprayed lower than that, but 55 is kind of the rule of thumb. And then same thing for next spring. Right as it's warming up, it's not gonna, in late March, if you get a couple of warm days, which we tend to have late March, early April, you just get a spell of a couple warm days, you can usually get a spraying in there for against your cool season grasses. So I obviously everyone's land's different, so you've got to be careful in there and customize it to what you need. But general rule of thumb, interseeding, not a good call, hard to do.
If you want to know where property boundaries are for public or private, you want to develop a great plan for your farm, document perfect access to a blind, to a tree stand, carve out and measure food plots, connect your mulch trail cameras to an app that shows exactly where they're at, and you can look at the feed for that specific camera location, then Onyx is something you need to check out. It is the only mapping software I use when it comes to deer hunting. I've tried other pieces of software, different apps, and I always go back to Onyx because I think it is the most comprehensive, easy to use, and robust mapping software there is when it comes to hunting and land ownership. You want to send a pen to a friend, boom, send it to them right to text, opens it up. Maybe you have notes, maybe you have pictures on that pin, transfers all of it. You want to send a whole entire folder of a plan that you mocked up, you can do that on Onyx. So be sure to check out Onyx. They are a huge supporter of the Land Podcast. They allow us to travel around and talk to some folks that can give you really good insight and good information no matter where you're at in your process of buying land. Let's get back to the conversation.
Another good herbicide tool is clethodim, because when you look at old CRP that isn't very diverse, whether it be because of invasive grasses or because big blue stem is just taking it over. If you use that grass selected herbicide where it's just well, I guess it's just a grass herbicide. I shouldn't say grass selected, grass herbicide like clethodim. You will set back all grasses, and that includes even your desirable grasses like big blue stem or switchgrass, that may have just taken over. That we have a good friend, Pete Berthelsen, who works for this organization called Conservation Blueprint out of central Nebraska, and he has tons of. In fact, he was on the committee that helped establish a lot of the CRP management guidelines that the USDA has today. So he's been around the program since its inception, I believe, and he has a great video on how he uses clethodim to increase forb diversity in a prairie stand. Historically it would have been the big grazers that would have taken care of that. And now that we don't have bison and elk throughout much of the Midwest anymore, it just doesn't happen. And so those grasses can become dominant without some other force that's hurting them. But I think a good simple rule to maybe think of is you want to create holes in the stand if you're wanting to interseed, which is essentially what Nickolas is describing there. You're wanting to have an area where there's significantly decreased competition for those new seeds that you're putting in there, and you can achieve that through different ways. Like Nickolas said, well-timed burns. If you're allowed to graze it, you could use some grazing, or you could just, again, probably the easiest thing is a backpack sprayer and go in and nuke a few spots and put some fresh seed in. But you're gonna have to hit it a couple times, to create those holes to allow for that diversity to work itself back in.
Oh, this sounds like a lot of work.
It is. It is a lot of work.
A lot of work. A lot of. It's not like planting a regular old food plot, or even heck planting soybeans for that example. Is it all worth it? Is it worth doing all this?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This weekend, which a little preview here. We're supposed to have Jake from the Hunting Public on our podcast this winter sometime. He's been a longtime listener and just a super nice guy from my limited interactions with him. But I would put him up there as I have not, from what I've seen, and Jake, I follow the whitetail world pretty closely. The most talented whitetail hunter that I think I've ever seen, and he.
Wow, say it right to Jake's face.
That's right. That's right.
No, that's all right. No hard feelings.
It's unreal what that guy does in the diverse ecosystems that he hunts them in, and just his success rate is it's just unbelievable. And I've taken notice that a lot of that has been in a prairie ecosystem. And if you follow the Hunting Public, their deer tour is going on right now, and they just had their first 2 episodes I watched over the weekend. Greg from the Hunting Public just basically did what Jake used to do, and he shot a giant buck. I'm not sure what state it was in, maybe South Dakota or Nebraska, or it might have been North Dakota, one of the few states that's open right now. But total prairie ecosystem that they were in, and just really reiterate, and just the number of bucks they were seeing, the number of total number of deer, it's like, man, this is, you just don't think of that when you think of deer hunting. You think of, oh, gotta
Woods.
have, yeah, forest, you gotta have, but all, and that's true in a lot of our parts of our country. They're an edge species, so they do like woodland habitat. But historically, so much of deer country USA was the prairie part of our country, and these animals were thriving in a prairie ecosystem, and they would just find the edges within the prairie, and the health of those animals, because of that diverse diet that they could have in such an ecosystem. I mean, there's nothing more diverse than a prairie, and other than maybe like a coral reef or something. You really got to go to the extremes of
Yeah.
this planet to
More
find
diverse than
something.
the jungle,
Yeah,
in
I
its
mean,
original form. Yeah.
yeah, hundreds of species, and they were utilizing many of them for food. And so then of course you have the natural cover aspect of it as well, just seeing those animals disappear into tall grass and that. And so if you
That's
can bring back historically what they had, I think you're just doing so much for the health of your herd on your property.
That's a fascinating observation because I was watching the Grit series with Latitude,
Yeah,
and Corey shot his best buck of all time, and he's in Kansas, and it's actually he shot him from the ground. He's full
yeah,
draw, and then there's a swath of compass plant right in
yeah,
front of him,
yeah.
and it's like, dang, this should be on the cover of a Prairie Seed bag.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's crazy.
Now that you
Tony
say that, yeah,
Tony Treach. I don't know if you've ever talked with Tony. He's from Michigan. He's another guy who's one of the best, most talented deer hunters that I've ever seen out there. He almost exclusively hunts deer from the ground in prairie habitat out in Kansas. And it's kind of the same deal. They just, that's what they're after. They're after those big healthy animals, and living in that unique ecosystem. And what I think what we're so privileged with in Iowa and Illinois is we do have enough of the woodland habitat to where we get a nice diverse, if you plan your property well, manage it well, you can capitalize on both things that these areas had going for them, 500 years ago.
I
hmm
and I would add, I know that this isn't exactly the podcast, but Iowa and a lot of the Midwest, and then definitely down the river in the Mississippi River, we're having water quality crisis.
Yeah.
Connected with cancer, no doubt that it's connected to cancer. There's other huge issues. We can't even. Iowa has the most sophisticated water filtration system in the United States, and it can't keep up with the quality of water. And then we interview a very kind gentleman named Dr. Matt Helmers from Iowa State
Yeah.
University, and he says, yeah, a 30-foot prairie buffer strip would take out 80 to 90% of the nitrates that are causing an issue. You
that's it.
know,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And prairie, in terms of a diverse prairie, if you look at after everything gets harvested in the year, everything's harvested, there's like no life out there. What I mean is, like,
Hmm.
there's no animals. Nothing
Yeah.
lives out there. And
Sterile.
that's like 2/3 of the Midwest. And so I'm not saying we need to go back to all prairie. That's not what I'm saying at all. But let's give them pockets to live in. And so those are the kinds of things that prairie does past that. And so we had a gentleman, he had a backyard pollinator, 500, maybe 1,000 square feet. I mean, like a big
Small.
room
Yeah.
worth, yeah, just in his
Hmm.
yard. That's all he had. And it had a lot of quote unquote deer repellent species in it. And he had a deer. Kent, what was going on there?
Yeah. Actually, this is another friend, a mutual friend of ours, Jake, Caleb,
Oh yeah.
and he
Yeah, yeah,
planted. Just he wanted to support his friend, and he was interested in it. A guy who loves habitat. He lives in an urban setting. He's like, yeah, I'll put in one of those backyard prairies in my yard. So he put in like a little eighth of an acre, maybe. And last year, before his wife went to work, she like looked out in their backyard, and she got a picture of this, probably I would say he's probably a 4.5-year old 10 point tending a doe in his eighth of an acre prairie plot. It's like this is the habitat. This is where we want to be. This is where we're going to bed down, and we feel secure. And is like, man, if that is not evidence for how this stuff is a magnet to whitetails, I don't know what is, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think there's a lot more benefit that goes unsaid and even unseen, unstudied.
Mhm.
So is it worth it? The other thing I would balance out is when you add hours to hours over a 10-year period, my guess, if you establish it correctly to begin with, you actually have less hours in it over a 10 to 15-year period, which is the prairies have no issue lasting 10 to 15 years. That is not a stretch for them. So if you compare that to food plot or compare it to TSI, that might have to happen later, and I think
Yeah.
it does feel like a lot of work the first 18-ish months, and then it really people are like, "Yeah, I don't do anything anymore." I get those phone calls a
Well,
lot, so.
and I want to talk about a reality with that work. Jake, you and I have had this conversation before. I have seen so many people, myself included, make a mental transition once they start just messing with this stuff. And it's not just prairie, but it could be like Nick said, TSI work, or you start to, as you're going into it, you think to yourself, other than the significant people in my life, I don't know how I could love anything more than what I love, schlocking big bucks from a tree stand. It's just, it's what we just assume is the ultimate enjoyment on this earth. And then you start operating on a piece of ground, and you start um influencing positive change on that ground. And you kind of end up at this point like, oh yeah, man, it's September. I better get my bow out. I better make sure I got my tags ordered for this year. And because there's this transition that happens in your mind of what hunting was previously doing for you, which was giving you this sense of purpose. It was giving you something that had relatively high stakes. Anytime you kill an animal, there's high stakes. And I think when you're killing a big game animal, especially, there's this level of there's this gravity to it, right? And when I think for a lot of people in this day and age, because we're so removed from having gravity in the decisions we make each day that
Mm.
personally affect us and the people around us, hunting helps soothe that hole, right? It helps fill that hole. And whereas you go back 100 years, and I bet most of the people listening to this podcast right now, if they trace their ancestry back 100 years ago, they were at least collecting eggs and milking a cow every morning, right? Gravity, their family was surviving on the work that they were doing at 4:30 in the morning. And now at 4:30 in the morning, unless you're Jake who goes to work out every day because he's so disciplined, we're just rolling over in our bed and thanking the Lord that it's not 5:30 when we have to get up,
Hmm.
and so hunting helps give us that. It helps fill whatever that need is in our psyche. And when you start managing a piece of ground, whatever itch hunting was scratching, it's now being scratched by something else. And the I think one of the most difficult things about when only hunting can scratch that itch is you can only scratch that itch during hunting season, and when you can go during hunting season. If you're
And when that progression happens too, where they're like, "Well, I can't find a deer that excites me
Yep.
this year. I'm not even gonna go." Like how
Yeah,
many times have
right,
we
yeah.
heard that? And not to cut you off here, but that's the beauty of land ownership
Yes.
is what you're getting to. So I'm gonna pass it back
Uh,
to you. I
yeah,
don't want to
absolutely.
hijack your point.
Well, no, it's a great aspect of it. It it has been so interesting to me since, the passing of Carol, and I was in very much so the assistant seat before Carol passed, right? I wasn't making many of I weighed in on big decisions, but it came down to him. But now that the buck stops here with what is decided on a production standpoint, of course, Nickolas and Riley help figure that out too. But it
Poor
really,
Ken, so many times he'll be like, "What do you think?" I'm like, "Ken, I cannot make that decision. You gotta figure that out."
yes, yep. I've just found that um it it's scratching that itch, and to be honest with you, Jake, even more so than when I was on a big buck, or when hunting season would roll around and I wasn't making these kind of decisions. And so I think whether you're buying ground, which is definitely the route to go. But maybe all you can do right now is lease ground, or maybe you can talk with a landowner who's giving you permission to make some of these changes, or even volunteer to help. Like, hey, I noticed your CRP is, um, you know, man, not looking so good. And then you'll probably find out, yeah, the USDA says I got to do something about it. So glad to help. Once you can start influencing change in those ways, which does include all this hard work that we're talking about, the upfront work that goes into having a healthy prairie, you will find that it's not just another thing to check off the list, like getting your oil change on your banker's holiday off from work. It's like, I get to go burn today. I
Mhm.
get to go and see how all these seeds are coming up. And man, when you see it happening, it is so empowering to see that. You know what I mean? It's like, I contributed to this. I made a difference. This is something that could literally last longer than me. And that is, to me, all that work, although it is chores, although it is hard, although it is sweaty, although it is backbreaking at times, it is so worth it. And I think 95% of people who participate in it take great enjoyment from doing it.
I couldn't agree more with that. And there's something special about seeing a big deer walking through CRP and you
Yes.
catch a
Oh,
tine,
yes.
or you
Oh,
see the doe just standing there and like looking.
give it. You're giving
It's
me chills right now,
yeah.
man. Thinking about it. We're too close to season.
I know. I'm chomping at the bit here. Nicholas, when are you gonna get bit by the whitetail bug? I've been wanting to ask this to you for a long time. You like by default, you've interviewed some of the best hunters over
Yes.
the years,
Yeah.
and it's still like, yeah, I don't know.
It's okay. So here's what it is. Actually, you know what? Pheasant hunting,
Okay.
because I would pheasant hunt with dad and when I was young, and it's growing more on me because like I I enjoy being with people. Well, deer hunting, the like sitting there
It's a
and
solo
not
sport, yeah.
doing or saying anything, that like makes me want to cry. That's like that sounds like, I mean, I see a big buck, I'm like, man, that's pretty awesome. Like I'd love to have one of those, but then they're like, yeah, I don't know if I could like sit there and I don't know. I feel like I would much more appreciate, enjoy, and get lifelong satisfaction out of like going to Colorado and tracking down a big elk and you
Uh-huh.
know what I mean? Instead of like
Mhm.
sitting and waiting. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Sitting and waiting might be good for you though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. He
Oh
has
man,
to
you got to
deal
do
with
that.
those deep inner thoughts that he keeps
Yeah.
pushing
Oh,
away.
You
so my drive to work's like 45 minutes, way too long. And the about I don't know, once a month or so, I'll make myself on the way into work, listen to nothing, say not just sit there. Terrible, very painful. Very, very, very painful. But
I don't think it would be as boring as you think because you'd be sitting in the tree and then you'd be looking at different trees, different species, different, across the board. I don't think it'd be as bad as you think.
it probably is, like when you haven't worked out in a while and you think about working out, oh, that seems so terrible. But like by workout 6, you're like, oh, this is
Yeah.
like, I'm enjoying this. I'm
Yeah.
glad I ripped off the old band-aid. And I
Yeah.
think there's just some sort of like serotonin addiction that I'm avoiding going out there and sitting and waiting.
Well, it's probably not a bad thing to have someone not wanting to be MIA from October 25th to November
That's true.
25th too. So
That's true.
Man, I really enjoy speaking to whitetail hunters. Something that I would give to them more than any other group that I work with a bunch of different groups in the native industries. Um, they like see the big picture, all of it. Because
Mhm.
I deal with groups where they see the conservation side. Man, they love it, but they're not thinking about price. They're like, we just need to make everyone like put this in their yard or do this or have these government contracts. I'm like, yo, you're talking about like billions of dollars. That's hard to do.
Mhm.
Or there's some that they're really just after hunting. There's some hunting groups that seem much less interested in legacy and long term, the longevity of the resource, and whitetail hunters just seem to understand. Like, hey, we get there's a economic standpoint that has to be lived by, but we also understand the longevity, and we're willing to put in some more work. And
Mhm.
and what's interesting is Kent and I we've talked about this before. Is there's like a progression in in hunters' lives where they care about they care about killing a buck, then they seem to care about killing the biggest buck they can. And then when they get a lifetime buck, And then they really there's like this like, oh, I care about the resource. And then there comes a time where I care about the next generation coming in. And there's this progression. What's interesting is that progression seems to be happening to younger and younger hunters. It used to be like, oh, I'm 62, I don't get out there as much, but I'm really starting to protect the resource and wanting to help the kids get into it. Now there's like 34-year-olds that are like, yeah, just trying to help the young kids get into it. I'm like, man, you like get it. It's awesome. So I gotta give my flowers to the whitetail crowd. You guys are awesome.
They're gonna
Yeah.
love to hear that.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks we're crazy. Someone finally sees sees what we see.
So
Well,
honestly, you guys are some of the last. You're one of the last defenses in Iowa for native habitat.
yeah, that's true.
It's true, and you guys and whitetail hunters are willing to fight harder than anyone else because when all the when all the habitat for pheasants got ripped out, the pheasant hunters weren't nearly as loud. And we got
Mhm.
to give a huge shout out to Taylor Riggin, who's taken the front line and gone to legislation and actually gotten work done,
Yeah.
put a
And
ton of his
Skip.
own money on the line,
Yeah.
just doing really cool things. Iowa Sportsman Club, if anyone's interested, doing really cool things for protecting that habitat. But I like whitetail hunters. They're some of my favorite.
Yeah, I'm a member, and I don't even live in Iowa. That's how much I support what
That's
they're doing.
awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
that's
well,
yeah. Go
you know,
ahead,
you
Kent.
I also want to give credit to Steve, another mutual friend of ours, and Skip as well. They've put up a lot of resources and time, being there at the Capitol as well, and interacting with these different legislators, helping them understand the importance of everything Nickolas just described. It's really humbling to know that there's people willing to essentially lose money, lose opportunity, even on uh, things that they know if they were to just capitalize on, would degrade the resource for everyone, including people who own no land, especially for people who own no
Yeah.
land and only are able to hunt public land or hunt a few times a year. Everyone benefits from the work that Taylor, Skip, and Steve and others involved have put into it.
Buckland Funding. If you don't know who they are and you're looking to buy a piece of ground, I encourage you to reach out to them. They're chartered in multiple states across the Midwest, and they understand recreational land. I've said it a million times here on the podcast. The most important piece of buying your first piece of ground is finding a partner, finding a bank that understands what you're trying to do, that has competitive rates and understands the world of recreational land, because not all banks are created equal, and Buckland Funding understands our crazy goals of scooping up a piece of ground to enjoy it with family, to hunt it, to use it as an investment. They understand that and work with that every single day. I encourage you to reach out to them. If you're in the process of buying your first or 20th farm, reach out to Buckland Funding at bucklandfunding.com. Back to the conversation. Mm-hmm. What, in your opinion, and I hate asking situational questions because usually I get the answer, it depends, but I'm just going to throw this out here and see what sticks. So as far as someone, let's say I call you and I have 20 acres. So it's a small piece.
Yep.
I'm inspired by this conversation. I'm inspired by what you guys do. I have 20 acres, 15 acres is timber, and my plan is to manage the timber properly and do TSI, get a forester out there, make sure I take good care of it. And then I have 5 acres of open land. So, and I'm going to add one more caveat. It is in cool seasons right now. It was an old pasture. They used to have a couple cows out there. The cows are out, and I want to have some sort of an annual food source for deer hunting. And I think, 2.5 acres would probably be enough for annual food. And I have 2.5 acres of whatever you guys suggest. We're going to give you some more information so you guys can give a thoughtful answer. Let's say it's, within the latitude of Des Moines and the deer density is average. And it's just picture the Midwest along
Does
the
it
river.
get at least medium to full sun? Because that makes a huge difference.
It will, because if that's important and
Yeah.
do it, I'm going to take out some.
If you
some
start
old
going
maples
mostly
or-
shade, that gets tough. That gets really,
we're going to
really
say it's mainly full sun, or it will be full
Mhm.
sun.
Well, just like any kind of e-scouting for hunting, right? You need to look and see, what does the land give me to work with here? And I'm going to guess if you have 15 acres of timber, there's only one reason. Well, there's a few reasons why there's 15 acres of timber there. Either you bought the property off of a previous deer hunter, or it is untillable.
Yeah.
And you're going to want to play with what you got already. And as we know, deer are edge species. Um, and so when you can have some kind of transition instead of a hard transition, I view like when somebody has tilled row crop acres right up to timber, that to me is a hard transition.
It's a cliff type of
Right. Yeah.
cliff.
Right. And not that deer won't use that. We've all seen deer use that all the time. In fact, a lot of people, that's probably all they have to hunt. So deer will use that, but if you can have that feathered edge, that can more gradually step down, have the steps going into the pool instead of just the jump, the diving board going into the pool.
Mm.
And if you can transition to your food source by surrounding that annual food source, whatever it is you're going to be planting there, some kind of forage crop. Um, I would try to have that feathered edge with my prairie going from the timber to the food source for, I would say, at least 10 yards. Then, because something else that many folks are concerned about is screening, both for access, ingress, and egress to the stand, right?
Mhm.
um, or to the habitat if you're a mobile hunter, right? You may not have a specific stand, but have specific areas where you're going to be doing a hang and hunt. And then also you want screening from other wandering eyes, right? People driving by. Um, I'm guessing if it's a 15-acre block of timber, it's probably going to be all on one side of the property, which means that if you just plant your prairie right next to your timber and then your food plot, your food plot's going to be next to the road. And at 2 a.m., man, I nearly threw out a stereotypical name. But at 2 a.m., when some uh, old school redneck, we'll say, comes driving by uh, in a rusty lifted truck with holes in the
You seem
exhaust.
like you're thinking of someone
Yeah,
specific.
Right. Yeah.
yeah, with a bad exhaust leak.
Yeah.
There-
Stereotypical name. This is his name. This is where he lives.
yeah. There will probably be a rifle that there is no season for in Iowa, poked out the window at 2 a.m. and probably with a thermal scope on it, I would guess. And
man.
that you will be all of a sudden seeing bucks disappear on your cell cam. So the way I would do it is I would do a 10 yard transition from timber into the food, have the food relatively close to the timber. And then I would plant my other 2-ish acres of prairie in between that food and either the property line or the um, uh, roadside. But with that in mind, creating some kind of bedding area that gives favor to south facing exposure, or somewhat protected by the timber as well, so deer have a safe, comfortable spot to use that prairie for bedding, so that they aren't just relegated to bedding in the timber. But I think that you'll, even in that 10-yard strip, you'd be amazed at how many deer will bed down in that, in between the timber and the food source as well. And use it as a staging area too, which can be just dynamite to hunt, and can be a real nice cruising rut funnel too, to
Yeah.
have deer moving along that during November. So
You want
What?
so I'm gonna take a different angle. I'm gonna give you
Mhm.
species. I'm gonna give you
That's
specific
what that was going to
species.
be my next question. So I'm glad. Okay, perfect.
All right. So you're looking for a tall screen. We
yep.
actually have one on our website, but you're looking for things like obviously big blue, switchgrass, Indian
Mhm.
grass. It's gonna be heavy on those. But and to keep the structure, they need the switchgrass. But put some wildflowers in there, some Maximilia sunflower, some compass plant, some black-eyed Susan, some wild berg, some of these things that will actually add life to that strip. And whitetail hang around life. They just like life. And if you put a few forbs in your tall grass fields, you actually will see more whitetail in there than if you just had big blue and switchgrass, which I think they
Mhm.
do have success. The big blue and switchgrass.
Yeah.
There's probably a million acres out in the Midwest of just big blue and switchgrass. They do see some success, but you'll have more if you add a few forbs. Some forbs add a lot of price. Not all of them do. Some of the ones that don't add a lot of price. Illinois bundleflower loved by whitetail. Partridge pea, loved by whitetail. Purple prairie clover, white prairie clover, loved by whitetail. You can add so the things you kind of um and then if you're wanting more of a habitat, not a screen, want more of a habitat, you'll go like half the big blue Indian, some switchgrass, and half shorter grasses, rough drop seed, little blue stem. They love little blue stem for whatever reason. I don't know if it's like the perfect height to walk through. Cytotsgrama. Those are the big grasses. And then for flowers, all those legumes that I just mentioned, but you could also add coneflowers, either Rudbeckia or Echinacea coneflowers, a couple different families. They seem to really like those. They like stiff or they like goldenrods, but they like goldenrods when they're young. They'll kind of nibble on them when they're young. When they get older and you see the big yellow, they're less interested in those. So, and blazing stars, same thing. They like them when they're young. But the idea is that you want a diversity of forbs that the deer at least tolerate, because then they've got a young forb for most of the season. Our friend Judd McCollum calls that a full plate. They've got something nutritious for them in any way that they're wanting, because they're concentrate selectors, right? And so you want all a ton of different kinds of nutrition out there
Mhm.
that is primed to be eaten at a bunch of different times throughout the season. And you can add that. You don't actually have to have a perennial native food plot to do that. You could just do a high diversity habitat mix. The only difference in our mind is that we're if native perennial food plot, I'm going to take out the tall grasses. That's the only difference. The habitat, I'm going to keep all the same flowers in it. I'm going to have all the same short grasses, but the habitat, we're adding big blue stem, switchgrass, Indian grass, because they kind of like to hang out in there a little longer. And the reason I take it out for the native perennial food plot is because it has a little more competition, the tall grasses do. So I want those flowers to be the main thing. I want to push for them. And so I'll take out the taller grasses for it.
Mhm. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think, as far as like fawning, I mean, there's a lot of coyotes running across
Yeah.
the Midwest, and I feel like uh, the prairie itself has got to be the best fawning habitat
Yeah.
Hmm.
available. That's just my opinion. I'm
Yeah.
not a biologist. That's just my armchair opinion.
Well, and there again, diversity helps with that. I once heard this was years ago, but on the Mississippi State Deer Lab podcast with Dr. Bronson Strickland and Steve Damaris, they talked about how having habitat when you plan it out, how you don't want to just do like strips of it, right? You want it to be kind of these large, you know, uh, you can't really describe what shape it's in, because it allows for better cover. Whereas if you have just like this long strip of prairie, um those predators can use it like a drag strip. Basically, they just know, if I just keep running along this strip, eventually I'm going to run into some kind of prey. And so when you have a diversity even in how you lay out your prairie, but then also all those different species, it makes the search that much more challenging for the predators to get to those vulnerable fawns in the spring. So that's a great point that you bring that up.
I want you guys next time you're in Illinois. I want you guys to look at my prairie so bad and get
We need to.
get like
Yeah.
the official. This looks good. This looks bad, and because
I,
I don't know, and I need.
I'd love to. We love touring prairies. I will throw in there too. Something that kind of like Nick talked about earlier with the progression of a hunter. There's been a progression in adopting native plants into land management practices, and I've seen this before on hunting properties, the old practice of doing the natives in monoculture. Now, unless you're planting that for seed production, I would never recommend, even for a screen, I would never recommend that somebody use prairie in a monoculture. So the only thing that I can think of where people have done that is switchgrass, right? Um, I have shed hunted switchgrass monocultures, and I'm sure there were some sheds in there. But man, you really, if you're going to find it, you're going to have to light a match. And what does that tell you then from its usability? From a usability standpoint, I mean, walking in that stuff was like walking on like a human-sized broom. At the end of a broom is just like so thick and just almost impenetrable. And I mean, as we know, a classic, like if you were going to go out to a piece of public land and you were going to do a hang and hunt, you're not going to look for the area. Man, yeah, that looks like that wall of bush honeysuckle over there. That looks impenetrable. That's where I'm going to set up. No, you're going to be looking for oh yeah, it's pretty easy walking through here. It would make sense that animal, any kind of game would funnel through this area because it's the path of least resistance. And so the same rule applies. I just don't think they use those monocultures as much. I'm not saying not at all. They certainly do. But they would use it more if there was even just a little bit of diversity, And so in our tall grass screen mix that we have, we do have several different species of tall grass prairie that deer absolutely use. And I think it helps create a little bit more room because really a monoculture switch to me behaves, switch is technically a bunch grass, but it in a monoculture kind of almost behaves like a turf grass. I mean, just the stem count gets so thick and just does not feel very useful.
What else, Nickolas? What's another most common question you get on a weekly basis in relation to the whitetail bunch that you're like, I wish they all listened to this clip right here?
Oh man. And it's this question. It's not a fun one because I don't have a fun answer. It's my least favorite question we ask. Well, what can I get to show up this year? They want to do natives. They want to do the right thing, but they really want it to show up. They don't want to lose a season of hunting. And Kent's brought up a really great point. If they're 40 years old and they have 25, 30 seasons of hunting where they feel good left. So they don't want to lose one of those. Totally understand. Not much of anything. I mean, Partridge Pea, you can get to show up the first year, Black-Eyed Susan, but those, those are monocultures. And if you're going to plant anything else with them, you need to keep them mowed so that all the other diversity has a chance to grow. So, what I try to help them understand is it is totally worth it in the long run. You made the exact same point. You are a living example. Hey, I went at it a year too soon and I regret it. And maybe to someone it's worth just having something there year over year. They only have 5 hunting seasons left for whatever reason. They know when they're going to die and maybe then it's worth it. But I would just point like it really does end up being worth it. The pros far outweigh the cons. But I do understand, like, you don't want to lose that hunting season, have to wait a full another year to hunt that part of your land. That is a really common question that I get. And then the last one that I get is what do they like to munch on quite a bit? But I'm sure you've connected with that quite a, and the answer just diversity. Just have your diversity out there, different plants, different years, and you'll be able to attract whitetail. And not only will you get them out there, you'll actually train them to understand that there's always food out there. And they'll just be hanging out there. Even when there's not much food, they're like, well, I know there's usually something out here. So,
yeah. I remember this past summer at Steve Hansen's farm, and he had a beautiful food plot. And he's like, the craziest thing was they would come over and munch on the clover for a second and then go right back over to the forbs and all eat in the prairie that we planted. He's like, this didn't make sense. So I feel like that's a good illustration of the power of that, because as whitetail hunters, we've all been conditioned to go to the store, plan our annual food plot, apply fertilizer, watch the deer in this particular area. And that has its place. And it definitely, there's parts on my farm where that it falls in that category, but I'm trying to Judd's point of like have the full plate and have the full seasonality of food and cover and all these different things. So I think that all makes sense. Real quick, rapid fire. And then I know you guys are busy. Let's see. What is your favorite prairie flower to see in full bloom?
Rough blazing star.
Good choice. Rattlesnake master for me.
I wouldn't know what either of those look like. But I need to pay attention.
Rattlesnake master looks like the national flower for Mars.
So yeah, it's a weird looking. And rough blazing star is the tall purple one that you'll see.
I think
similar to prairie blazing star. Yeah.
I think we either have that or blazes, whatever you guys. You guys know how to pronounce more hard words than probably anyone in any profession. Not even doctors.
You should listen to like the scholarly prairie experts. All they do is talk in scientific names, and we look dumb when we talk.
I feel so stupid.
Well, that means you're learning. That's part of it.
Yeah.
Um, let's see. Okay, first year, what is the most important tool for people to take away? Is it mowing, burning, or spraying for the first year?
Yeah, I would say spring.
Yeah.
As much as it's a deal. You feel like a handshake with the devil when you're dealing with pesticides, but we have the most fertile soils, and everything wants to grow here, including a lot of things that we don't want, and those things are probably already there. So you
Yeah.
got to get rid of them.
Yeah, not year 1, but year 0 spraying, right? That spraying prep,
Mhm.
that's the most important.
Hmm.
Making sure that it's not gonna have too much competition from, very tough cool season grasses.
Yep.
And then, in your opinion, based off of interviews, conversations, your own observations, when it comes to prairie and whitetails, what is the magic period of time? Like people can attribute mid October when the acorns are dropping, you need to be on an
Hmm.
acorn flat. So is there that same rule of thumb for prairie when it comes to whitetails?
I believe it was on, or I think it was the drone conversation that you had recently, and I listened to 3 podcasts on that guy's interview because they're so interesting. But so I'm probably mixing them together. But he talked about in one of them just how there's that transition when deer go from more of a forb diet to more of an acorn diet, and their rumen in their gut has to transition over to start um, handling some of that other stuff, and so the food aspect of the prairie lessens as you go into the dormant season, right? There's a lot of the seeds have blown away, a lot of the leaves that they were munching on are dried up. But it kind of reminds me of soybeans a little bit when you're hunting over soybeans. You have early in the growing season for a soybean, they're eating a lot of the leaves, right? And then as the pods start to develop, they might even eat some of those pods, and then they kind of go away from it once the leaves drop off the soybeans, and they maybe turn back to forbs more that are still hanging around, or they go to acorns as those are starting to drop. But then once all that has happened and you're back into like mid-November or something like that, if they're standing soybeans, it's like, all right, we can go back to the soybeans now, and we'll start munching on those pods. And so there will be species that hold seeds, native prairie species that are holding, especially legumes, is what I'm talking about here. So soybean family, they're gonna go back and they'll find those
Yeah.
during that time of year. But really, when you're planting prairie, you're helping your population out because of the reasons we mentioned before. It's super health. It's the healthiest diet there is on the ground for them. Um, it's great fawning cover. It's great cover for adult deer to mature animals to survive predation.
Yeah. To
It helps spread deer out a little bit, so it lessens disease. Judd has talked about before the water holding capacity of these plants, so it I really think prairie can be a major tool for helping prevent EHD outbreaks, because they're not being forced to get water from a very limited number of sources. Deer in a perfect world get most of their moisture from their diet, not from going and drinking out
Which
of
the
creeks and ponds.
the challenge now with the drought, things dry
Yeah,
out faster. I mean, I have some water
yeah.
holes, and as soon as the drought hit and you can start seeing stuff get crunchy,
yep,
Mhm.
the utilization of the water holes is skyrocketed.
yeah,
Just
Wow.
like a light switch went off or
yep,
on.
Wow. And
yep.
and to answer your question, I have no idea. And in the many, many hours I've talked to people about it, I've never heard someone say when is the perfect time for deer to hang out in the prairie.
You need to
But they
start
do
asking
seem
that
to be there
question.
all year
Yeah,
Well,
round.
yeah.
well, well. I'm gonna. I'll add to that. The back end of my answer is the huntability of it. So from a food standpoint, the huntability is not its primary thing. It does help, but it is not its primary thing. The cover and transitional aspect of it. And when you think about when most people are hunting deer is in November, right? And who is really super concerned other than if you're trying to figure out where the does are going to be. You're not really hunting food directly like you would be in October or in the late season. Um November is the time of year when you're trying to get into rut funnels, transition areas, high travel routes, all of the
Downwind of doe bedding
downwind
where
of doe
they could
bedding.
easily be bedded in the
And
prairie.
yeah, exactly. You're creating bedding. And so to me, that's where the huntability is from a cover standpoint, is where prairie really stands out compared to other types of cover that you would put on a property.
Yeah, my favorite style of farm to hunt is one with mixed CRP with mixed timber draws, and
Yep.
I personally just love hunting those, and so that's what I'm trying to recreate in a very long process to try to
Yeah.
establish timber
Yep.
and also prairie. But I think one thing that I truly admire about you guys is your operation is 500 acres. So someone that's been listening to this, like, oh yeah,
Mhm.
they just buy seed and mark it up. You guys are tending to your crops.
Yeah.
500 acres, 38 species. It's grown in Iowa, and I feel that myself and like previous business ventures, like I want to support the people that are putting in all the hard work and trying to grow and develop their own dream and build what has already been established. Like if people, more likely, if you're getting CRP, you're getting a stipend basically to buy your seed. So instead
Mhm.
of sending it to a soulless company that's harvesting or getting their seed from wherever, who knows,
Yeah. Sometimes other countries.
yeah, or would you have that stipend go to someone in Iowa growing and tending to their own crop? And like we were just talking before, and like I bet you your 500 acre farm operation is more labor intensive than think of the biggest operator in your county. I would have you guys rival the amount of work and hours and everything that goes into it. Like that's just my personal opinion. I don't know that for a fact, but that is what my gut tells me. So I just really respect what you guys have done and educating
Appreciate that.
folks on how to do all these different things. The bigger picture, Nickolas, you brought up water quality. Like it made me feel good because I have a creek and I planted a prairie buffer strip along the creek. I didn't know that stat, but it makes me feel a little bit better. Like we're on a well.
Yeah, it's huge. It's
Yeah.
huge.
Yeah. So I just, hats off to you guys. Really
Thank
appreciate
you.
what you guys do for the community. And if people want to follow you guys or tune into your podcast, I know a lot of people already listen to it, and there's been some good, no pun intended, cross pollination.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Between the two podcasts. Where can people find you guys?
Yeah, so hokseynativseeds.com, HOKSEY, hokseynativseeds.com, or just the Prairie Farm on Instagram or Facebook. Just Instagram's where you're gonna get most of this stuff. Instagram or TikTok, but we don't really check TikTok. So if you send us a message there, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's good for our soul.
yeah, you got to stay off that, man.
I do want to just do a real vague preview here. Nickolas is working on a project to so I guess this is more of a stay tuned. Don't go looking for it yet because you won't find it. But Nickolas is working on a project to help with management questions when it comes to establishing prairie. And so that is coming in the not so distant future. But it'll be a big help for getting a lot of these questions. But for now, you can always call us, and we'll be glad to give you some time and coach you through it. Even if you didn't buy seed from us, reach out. And we don't just grow seed and sell seed because we like it. I mean, we do, and it pays our bills, which is very important. But we want to see a significant portion of the ground that should be prairie become prairie once again. We understand we're in a working landscape. We understand that the human population is far greater than it has ever been in world history. And so that comes with its own unique set of caloric needs and spaces to live and things like that. But we do firmly believe that we could have a lot more of intact ecosystems on this planet than what we do currently. And so when if we can help other people have a healthy prairie, even if they didn't get their seed from us, that accomplishes that goal, that to have more prairie on the ground. And so always reach out if you have any questions.
Well, gentlemen, thank you. I know you guys are busy.
Jake.
I'll let you get back to your work. Really appreciate everything.
Thanks, Jake.
Yeah.